same time, the Washington Post had just broken Watergate with anonymous sources. The difference was, Leanne, that Seymour Hersh, he has unnamed sources where they had anonymous sources. Their anonymous sources that they used at the Washington Post were presumably not known even to the editors, whereas when he has unnamed sources, he makes sure that his editors know and vet who those sources are. That's the difference. Keeping the sources unnamed versus having secretive sources that nobody other than the reporters, in the case of the Washington Post, these were new reporters, cub reporters that had never done anything before, and they were allowed to use these secretive sources like Deep Throat or whatever. Nobody presumably knew who they were. Yet the Washington Post would still criticize him for this. Why? Because he's going after the intelligence operations that have been ineffective, that have been something, and you know, when they say they're making us safer, when I look at this newspaper from 1974, all over it is stuff about Iran. Okay, they're talking to former intelligence people. Richard Helms had by that time left the CIA and had gone to Iran. He was the ambassador in Iran. Then we have the Shah asking Americans to push for big contracts in Iran. You need to understand that Iran was essentially a state that was created and run by the CIA in the mid-70s. Okay, they had their secret police, the Savak, a reign of terror on the Iranian people, taking them, rendering them to torture sites, picking people up, as we see at Gitmo, other places, as we see the legal infrastructure in our NDAA. They had created that in Iran. So you want to know what America is going to look like if we don't stop this out-of-control surveillance state, this out-of-control torture state? Look at Iran under the Shah. It was a reign of terror, and of course, that's where all these guys were going to hide out at that time. So it just goes to show that when you give them a free reign, it doesn't make you safer at all.
Not. So it's incredible. I mean, it really is like we're in a time loop, just seeing the same exact stories on the front page with Iran, and then attacking journalists who would dare go that extra mile to dig a little bit deeper, like Gary Webb or Cy Hirsch, but also just looking at these NSA programs and how they were never about stopping terrorism, because again and again and again, they failed. There's so many instances of where they did not stop the terror attacks. Could it be because they want them to take place? But truly, Operation Chaos and these other things were about crushing dissent. Totally
Ineffective, but as you point out, they had Operation Chaos. That's what Nixon called the program. Before that, under Lyndon Johnson, under LBJ, it was called Project Resistance. They worked with college administrators, campus security, local police to identify anti-war activists and political dissidents without any infiltration taking place, they said. Then Nixon combined all that together with Operation Chaos, and I thought it was kind of funny, Leanne, that there was this Mel Brooks TV comedy that was created called Get Smart, and the antagonist in that, the nemesis in it, was Chaos. And that was about 4 years before these guys actually started this thing, so perhaps that's where that came from. But here's the difference. Today, it's much, much more dangerous because they did not have the technology in those days to record and analyze all these conversations. They could tap into people's conversations, but they were very limited, just like the Stasi was very limited in what they could do. Today, the added advantage of technology makes them far more dangerous. Even though they're doing the same sorts of things, they have that additional leverage of technology that makes it far more dangerous.
Right, and they're actually, a lot of this new technology with social media and everything was created with the intent that they would be able to collect all of our data. They're saying, wow, this is really wonderful. We're gonna be able to build a Matrix-like reality, simulate what's going on in the real world. People are willingly giving up their data, letting us know where they are, what time. They turn on their smart homes that are tracking us and just giving us all of this information. And we've actually reported on some of these programs, the Sentient World Simulation. It's a continuously running mirror model of reality, and this helps them predict and evaluate future events and courses of action.
And that's just one program.
Yeah.
That's what's so troubling about the whole concept of mastering the human domain, which is a subtitle of the Jade Helm logo. When you go back and you look at human domain analytics, they talked about how they were looking at national intelligence, then they took it down to regions, then they took it down to individuals. They're looking at everything about you, who you know, your activities, tracking you constantly, and then looking at a context of politics and religion and various other things about you. That's what makes this all so dangerous. And what makes me so concerned about Jade Helm is that you can see, looking over the last several years, if you go back and you look at McRaven and others, they've been talking for quite some time about the special forces being boots on the ground for this intelligence gathering, saying you can gather a lot of intelligence and we can use that along with you to identify bad people and to track them, to create a map of the bad guys, essentially overlay that over a geographical map. But you need boots on the ground. You need human intelligence there that can also be spying on people and reporting this back to you. So it is total. It's not just looking at your license plate as you drive by, not just having cameras everywhere, but also having physical spies on the street. And that's what Jade Helm is always about, is this merging of the human domain analytics, activity-based intelligence, all these different aspects in with special forces, with the military, with the police, merging them all with the NSA.
Right. How are people going to react if the water supply gets cut off, or if there is a military coup in their state? How will they react? And they can see how the state of Texas has reacted.
Predictive also, looking at it and saying, well, I can see this, I think this might happen. Singling out people because they think they might commit some kind of a crime or an action in the future, taking action against them, but then also taking this as part of a PSYOP, analyzing it and trying to shut this down, taking away people's will to fight, taking away their ability to fight, using PSYOP operations and disinformation to people to keep them passive. That's all about population control. So they use the human domain analytics to master us, and that can be psychologically or it can be physically in the case of special forces.
Right, and you're absolutely right. It is about numbing us to the presence of troops on the street, you know, in civilian clothes, gathering intel, and it's almost like when we're bombarded with all of this racism here every day, you become numb to it. You almost really stop caring. Oh, another riot. Oh, another protest. Oh, goodness.
And that's essentially what happened back in the day when the Pike Committee hearing did this. People had seen so much about the CIA, so many admissions with Watergate and everything. The people just started turning off to government corruption. They went back, turned inward, just worked on themselves, their private life, their entertainment. They didn't pay any attention to this. We wound up not doing anything. The only thing that came out of it was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. And all that has done is serve to give a legal cover to the NSA's current dragnet surveillance. They just go to a FISA court with one judge, no adversarial relationship, get him to say, yes, you can spy on, as Rand Paul called it, Mr. Verizon. And they go out and get everything that Verizon has.
Right. And it's so funny as well because the American people, something has switched on with this whole Jade Helm. People are saying, this is unusual. But even in the face of that, they're still saying, this is completely normal. We do this all the time. It's just a little bit bigger. And there's drills and exercises in every state constantly now. And it's completely normal, even though in our spirit, the American people are saying, wait a minute, something isn't right with this. And it has trickled down to so many mainstream elements for a reason. And even in the face of that, we're being told it's completely normal.
I think it's the slides, being able to see the maps there makes it real to people, just like they had heard many times about dragnet surveillance and the intelligence agencies getting out of their legal jurisdiction. It wasn't until they saw slides. Now those slides labeling Texas and other places as hostile, that was a very crude representation. It was just for an exercise, but you have to realize the reality is far worse than that. The reality is that they are mapping you down to the individual level with human domain analytics. Geospatial intelligence goes back to 1996, 5 years after it was created, in September of 2001. Does that sound like a familiar date? September 2001. James Clapper, the guy who famously lied to Ron Wyden and said, no, we're not collecting anybody's data. James Clapper was set up his first time he was put as director of an intelligence agency. It was director of geospatial intelligence. And that's what they're using for human domain analytics. People should be very concerned about the fact that we have the military, the Homeland Security, and the NSA all merging together, working on this. And you can see this going on now for the last 15 years. So this Jade Helm is not something new. It's just the next level. And as people see this, hopefully at some point they're going to wake up to what's happening. And hopefully, unlike what we saw with the Snowden leaks, people will make some changes and question, what is the purpose of these organizations? Are they making us safer? Are they being effective with our money? is this something we want them to do or not? Because we, the people, are the ones who are controlling the government and have to take control of the government. We need to say, what is the mission going to be?
Right. And it is our funding that's keeping it all going. And again and again and again, they have not proven to be worthy of all of our tax dollars because they haven't stopped a single terror attack. That's not what they're really all about. And unfortunately, I think we're going to find out the truth, the transparency, when it's a little too late, when all of these virtual, matrix reality is turned on and we're already enveloped in this digital imprisonment, the digital enslavement that we're helping to build with all this technology. And, in the meantime, I hope that we are wrong. I would like to continue to just be the crazy conspiracy theorist. I just hope we aren't right about this. I hope they don't ever bring the hammer down on America.
Well, they're selling all this with fear. They're selling it all with conspiracy. And when the enemy doesn't really exist, they eventually create the enemy for us. If the war and the threat doesn't exist, they create the war. They create ISIS. They do create physical threats. They don't just, get their funding and leave it as imaginary. They make real threats who really go out and kill people. And that's what we should be concerned about, is not only fear-mongering and conspiracy theory by the government, but the fact that they make it come true.
Yeah, gosh, you're absolutely right about that. We saw some of that footage earlier today with the brand new MRAPs that ISIS had. You're absolutely right. They will create this enemy. Well, while we're under attack, journalists, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists like Seymour Hersh are also under attack. So here is another great report from John Bound. Just who is Cy Hersh?
Who is Cy Hersh, and why does what he says matter? Mr. Hersh exposed the cover-up of the 1968 My Lai massacre of between 347 and 504 unarmed Vietnamese citizens and received the 1970 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting for his work. He has notably investigated the CIA's secretive Project Azorian. Hersh recently exposed the mistreatment of detainees at the Iraqi prison Abu Ghraib. Mr. Hersh has the journalistic integrity to take the lonely path seldom seen towards the truth. Now this award-winning journalist and touchstone to a fading era of investigative journalism faces an administration that has set a new record on what can only be declared as a war on transparency. The Society of Professional Journalists, made up of 38 groups, wrote a letter to the Obama administration criticizing its overall politically driven suppression of the news. Hersh's solution to the lapdog media that whitewashes Obama's dirty laundry is to shut down news networks like NBC and ABC and fire 90% of the mainstream editors, replacing them with real journalists who are outsiders and not afraid to speak truth to power. The Republic's in trouble. We lie about everything. Lying has become the staple, concluded Seymour Hersh.
The way to make government responsible is to hold it accountable. And the way to make government accountable is make it transparent so that the American people can know exactly what decisions are being made, how they're being made, and whether their interests are being well served. The directives I am giving my administration today on how to interpret the Freedom of Information Act will do just that. For a long time now, there's been too much secrecy in this city. The old rules said that if there was a defensible argument for not disclosing something to the American people, then it should not be disclosed. That era is now over.
Recently, Seymour Hersh said that the raid which killed Osama bin Laden in 2011 is one big lie, and that not one word of the Obama administration's narrative on what happened is true. Speculation that the Obama administration may have embellished or outright lied about the true account of what happened has persisted, mainly because the White House has refused to publicly release images of bin Laden's body. Although the White House said the corpse was immediately buried at sea in line with Islamic tradition, it quickly emerged that this was not standard practice. Numerous analysts have claimed that bin Laden had in fact been dead for years and that the raid on his alleged compound in Pakistan was little more than a stunt.
It's on record that Steve Pachinik, who worked as the top deputy to Henry Kissinger and who also is a high-level Council on Foreign Relations member, was interviewed back in April of 2002 and said that bin Laden was dead and that was on ice, and that in the future he would be used at a politically expedient time to bolster the government in the eyes of the people.
He died of Marfan syndrome Bush Jr. knew about it. The intelligence community knew about it. CIA had already sent a physician way before under the Clinton administration to see him at the American